So there's been a heat wave in Europe again, and I think there's some stuff that we can learn about it. This should be similar to some of our other videos that we've done on recent events that involve large-scale hazards or disasters. We should be putting in some references to things. There'll be some news articles that you guys can read and put them next to this, etc. But you should find this pretty informative. Okay. So, as of today's recording, today is June 30th, 2026. I'm going to be referencing some articles for numbers on things that happened in the days prior. But as of right now, there is a pretty significant heat wave going on in Europe. This is not the first time this has happened. And there's a whole bunch of responses to this heat wave in Europe that you're seeing on social media and from the public at large. In some parts of social media in particular, this has now shifted into a people mocking people for different reasons sort of thing. So you're seeing people in the States and especially in social media from China posting videos of how they have dogs and pigs and other farm animals, etc., that have 3 air conditioner units attached to them, and they just plug them in, mocking people in France and people in Europe for not having air conditioning. So it's the line that people will say is, oh no, I took it out because it was too inflammatory. Okay, so the inflammatory line that people are basically saying is that Chinese dogs and pigs live better than European people, you know, that sort of thing. And it's because of reference to the air conditioners. Now this gets a bit complicated. We're going to get into that in a second, but basically that's sort of what's going on. And then the other side, you have people who are from Europe, people who come from these other countries, and people who are more interested in climate change and greenhouse gases and etc. as long-term risks. They're putting up pictures of basically the evil polluter being the United States or China, basically blowing the heat wave onto Europe. So the idea here basically is that all of the air conditioners that the bad countries are running is causing the good countries to undergo a heat wave and people to die. So that's kind of the way that things are being framed. I am going to disagree with most of that on both sides of this and the way that is framing, because I think it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's sort of what's going on right now on the internet. So with that in mind, I want to take this back a bit and kind of explain the context of the situation and some things that you may or may not know about, especially if you haven't grown up in Europe, because this will help inform this, and many of you might find this interesting. I want to take us back on a magical journey here to the year of 2003. In the year 2003, Europe had its most extreme heat wave that it had seen in, I think, over 100 years. I have the date here. No, it was way more. It was 500 years. So in 2003, Europe had the worst recorded wave of heat that it's had since 1540. In this heat wave in 2003, over 70,000 people died. And in France in particular, a lot of elderly people died. But just to help exemplify how bad the situation was and how little they were prepared for it, the coroner couldn't process the bodies fast enough. And because so many people were dying so quickly, they were concerned about secondary public health disasters, cholera outbreaks, and the sort of things that happen when rotting bodies are in the streets or just end up in water supply, etc. You have secondary disease that occurs. When people die around other people, it can cause people to die, like with a cascading effect of bad things. That's why controlling dead matters. So what they had to do, this is in 2003, was they had to basically empty meat freezers and empty ice cream freezers, and they had to store their dead in freezers so that the coroner could process them through fast enough and they could deal with public health outbreaks or crises. So just keep in mind that when there are so many people dying from the heat wave so quickly that you're like emptying ice cream trucks, it's a pretty rude awakening that you have a heat risk. Europe and France in particular got a very rude awakening for how dangerous extreme temperatures can be, especially on the heat side. And that was 2003. It's been 23 years since then. So this isn't the first time this has happened. And this heat wave also isn't actually even as bad as far as the hazard is concerned than the 2003 heat wave. That heat wave was hotter than this one, well, for now. But just keep in mind that that is a thing, and there are things that they could have learned from that, or maybe not. So another note on that, actually, elderly people in particular were more at risk of death in the heat wave, in the 2003 heat wave than others, and they disproportionately died. There's 2 main reasons for this. One, elderly people are more vulnerable health-wise, similar to infants, children, and people with some pre-existing medical conditions where their bodies just aren't as resistant to extreme heats and extreme colds as much. So they're at higher risk of like first aid, heat illness, injuries, etc. We've done videos on that. So they're just a more vulnerable health category. But unlike children and infants. Elderly people are the one category generally in that tends to be, well, this is the right word for it, but really ignored. So culturally in France and in a lot of other countries around the world, elderly people are just kind of left alone very often, and they're not checked up on as much. So in many cases, they were just in apartments roasting to death without AC, and their family never called them, and they found them in a couple of days or longer. So in some of these cultures, they don't check on their elderly, they don't check on their grandparents, etc. And some of these people just didn't have families, so there was no family for them to check on, no family to check on them. So this just kind of happens. One of the lessons learned from this was the government reminded people to check on the elderly. Yeah, there's just a lot working in there, and we'll probably see in this heat wave as well that a disproportionate number of elderly people also tend to die compared to the other categories, but still, that's just one lesson that was learned from there. I actually wrote together a list of policies that came out of the 2003 heat wave that you might find interesting. So these are the things that they identified in 2003 that they should put in place, or that they did put in place. And just keep in mind here that what is not going to be here is a direct reference to air conditioning units and increasing power consumption, because Europe has been big on trying to attack global warming or climate change as a risk by reducing the amount of power that's been used. So all of these are not talking about increasing power consumption. Or if they do, it's by a very small amount, by like spraying water into a fan that's blowing at your face or something. They're not putting in giant AC units generally. But okay, so these are the things that they recommended. Health and heat warning systems. So they put warning systems in place to let you know that a heat wave was coming. So keep in mind, prior to 2003, you didn't have extensive warning that you would have heat issues. They didn't say, hey, there's different thresholds of heat for danger. There wasn't an awareness of, we're about to have a heat wave in a week. This is like catching up as far as weather reporting is concerned. They put heat health warning systems in place and heat warning systems in place that they didn't have the infrastructure before. Many people who've grown up in the States, in Canada, etc., you will have grown up with these your entire lives. And yeah, they didn't always have that. So that was implemented in countries that didn't have it before. They registered vulnerable residents, so they had registries. So if you were particularly elderly, or you were in a special category where they were worried that you weren't going to be checked on, they created a registry to actually check on you. They put cooling advice for long-term care homes. So prior to this, they didn't really have advisories or advice for how to cool a long-term care home. People just basically cooked. They put in emergency homeless support. Now, with supporting homeless people, not a lot was done here compared to what you've seen in like what's normative in Canada. But still, the point is that basically prior to this, there was almost nothing. So they put that in place. They put increased hospital staffing and funding for that during heat warnings. So the assumption was that they were going to have increased people in the hospital from heat illness, so they were going to staff it more. They didn't do that previously. They didn't have if there's this particular hazard we're worried about, we're just going to guarantee funding. We're going to have more staff because we assume it. So they put that in place. There was stockpiling of cooling equipment. So similar to how before we go into a cold season, the snow season in Canada, we start stockpiling salt to help with the roads, or we start stockpiling the fuel requirements necessary to run snow plows and stuff like that. You stockpile equipment that you would need getting ready for the seasonal hazards. So they started doing that, and they didn't really do that before, which, just keep in mind, this is like baby steps here. There was general public awareness on keeping homes cool and staying hydrated. So prior to this, they didn't do as much public health awareness on this is how you stay cold in your house. This is how you stay hydrated in your house. Some people don't actually know how to stay cool. You actually have to teach people this stuff. Well, for example, on the stay hot part, in Canada, some people every year die by bringing their barbecue indoors or some sort of outdoor heater indoors to heat up their house, and then they die from the fumes killing them or their house burning down. One might be surprised how important it is to educate the public on basics, but they weren't doing that to the same degree before, so they started doing that. On the infrastructure side, they started planting more trees and increasing green space. This has the effect of helping basically soak up heat so that there's not as much to go around. If you have a lot of asphalt, it can sort of heat up the ground, reflect it, and if you have more green space, it can cool the area. So they did that. They installed reflecting or cool roofs. So a reflective roof basically to stop the top of your house or the top of your building from heating and then distributing heat through the whole house. Instead of that, the building basically shoots heat off of it so that less gets in the house. It's in the insulation improvement. They also improved insulation. They increased the shade in public areas, so more trees, more awnings, more ways that you don't have direct sunlight hitting you. They reduced the number of paved surfaces. I talked about that before. So they tried to reduce the amount of surfaces that were around that were like black asphalt because those get hotter. And that means, if there's less hot stuff around you, that there's less heat coming off of it. So the hotter something is, and when there's an area around it that's cooler than that, the more heat that's going to give off. So by having less things that get hot, you have less kind of like little ovens baking everybody. So that was the idea there. And then other social adjustments like reduced work hours during heat waves. So if it was a long work day, you wouldn't have to work as long. So look, there's a bunch of stuff they did, okay? There's a bunch of stuff they did, but that's not increasing power consumption, and that's not air conditioning. They tried to go through other angles. Okay, here's some other background information that's prior to this heat wave that I think is relevant, because the big debate with this heat wave that you're hearing is, why don't you just turn on the air conditioner? So here's some energy information. In the last 10 years, the global production of energy from renewable sources. So the renewable category is considered like wind, solar, geothermal, all of the like non-fossil fuel, non-carbon stuff is the renewable side. So the total global production of renewable energy, and I'm quotationing renewable because it's complicated, but probably a different video for that. I might get into a bit here. The total production of that doubled in 10 years. While that happened, the total percentage of global energy that fossil fuels have been used to produce has increased. So it's gone from 81% to probably about 87 or higher. So while we doubled the amount of wind, solar, etc., we still used more fossil fuels as a percentage. The reason for this is because the global total demand for energy is increasing so exponentially quickly that nothing can keep up with it except for fossil fuels. So it's not just that we made more fossil fuels, even though we doubled the global renewable energy, we created more fossil fuel than that entire amount in the same amount of time just to keep up with current energy demand. People want to use energy. This is an important thing because this is a reality that I'm going to get to later that some of these countries need to really wrestle with and realize that their people care about, because you're basically fighting a losing battle here. Climate change / global warming is considered the #1 threat to the human population. In general, in disaster risk reduction, in my field, when you look at the UNDRR, it's the #1 threat. Europe has basically concluded and agreed that it is the #1 threat to the survival of the human species, and it is the absolute, once again, penultimate thing that everybody's worried about. So when that is your perspective, you're going to look at all of these other things very, very differently. If you're someone that doesn't believe in climate change or doesn't agree with climate change, you're going to heavily disagree with their perspective here. If you're someone that heavily agrees with climate change, especially the more sort of extreme views of it, where, you believe that the human race isn't going to be here in 50 years or something, then you may agree with some things here or not. But like the point is that that's where their head's at. Their head is at, this is the thing that's going to destroy humanity. And a lot of stuff starts getting justified when that's the threat you're dealing with. Because of all this, Europe in general has decided that they're not going to make more electricity. So they're not forcibly reducing demand. If you know like basic microeconomics with the relationship between like supply and demand, then you'll probably understand what I'm getting at here. Basically, what Europe has done is it's created its scarcity of energy through its policies, and it's priced its population out of being able to afford energy or the type of energy required to really reasonably respond to a heat wave. Basically, if you don't produce enough energy, then only the rich and the companies basically can afford it. And your public, even if they want energy, can't afford it, so they don't consume it. You put a cap on the amount of energy people can consume, and then it is what it is. The effect of this is that the really, really efficient energy users, comparatively speaking, like large buildings that can house a large number of people, So it's like people per energy as an efficiency thing, even though like one large building is less efficient at energy than one small building. 100 small buildings versus one large building, the one large building with 100 people in it's more efficient. That sort of decision was made. And the effect is that all of the less efficient people basically boil. Yes, so that's what they did. That's pretty much what happened. Going back to this event, there's a whole bunch of news that's come out about this. There's a bunch of clickbaity titles. There's arguably misinformation going around. Key takeaways and things I want you to consider. This isn't even as bad as it's been within the last 30 years. They had a heat wave that was worse, so far to date anyways, than the current one, in 2003. So this could be a lot worse, number one. Number two, taking one article I saw as an example, there was an article that came out that said that since June 18, 74 people have died due to drowning in France, and that this is a huge number, and that the heat wave is responsible for this. If you look at the annual number of people that have died due to drowning in France, which is about 1,000, and I'm saying died due to drowning because you can drown and then be recovered and then resuscitated, and then you didn't die. So I'm like, they drowned and then it resulted in death. Like if a lifeguard saves you, you were drowning, but you didn't die, right? The number of people that drown and die in France is about 1,000 people per year, and it's seasonal. So the bulk of that happens in the summer normally. You can expect around 100 plus-ish people to die from drowning in France in any given summer month. And that is 74. That might actually be within the expected range, even outside of a heat wave. Even with some variance in there, I'm not confident in concluding that the heat wave is responsible for that when that's kind of close to the total number of deaths they normally have from drowning. So there's a lot of like clickbaity titles out there that are starting to throw everything at the heat wave and blame it for everything, but some of these numbers aren't extreme enough for me to be, I don't know about that. Right? So I'm not sure about that one. Some of the political stuff on this, like the people, getting mad at each other on X/Twitter. Yeah, I get it. People want to, use dark humor and the idea of, hey, I have an air conditioner, watch my dog's more comfortable than you, ha ha ha, right? Some people view that as hilarious because it's dark humor. And some people view that as abhorrent or horrifying or very distasteful, whatever. But I mean, the point is it's happening. So that's going to happen. It's not really going to change anything much here, but it is happening and the internet will be the internet. One thing I looked at with this was what sort of questions are people commonly having when it comes to this? What sort of questions keep coming up in the discourse and what sort of questions have I received on this? And I wrote some down and wrote some basic responses to those questions because I thought that it would help illustrate some of this. So with all that context in the back, you can see why I answer some of these questions the way that I do. So the first, why don't Europeans have air conditioning? The basic answer, and some of the stuff you've seen around this is like, well, apparently it's illegal. It's not illegal. You can get an air conditioner in Europe. There are a few countries that have regulations around air conditioning, but it's around installation and permit usage. And this has less to do with making air conditioners illegal and more with just general building code stuff and not wanting someone who is not a professional in making these sorts of things to get involved and burn the house down. Let me explain that because I think for some people it's important. In many countries around the world, you have to be a skilled tradesperson to install stuff. The reason why we require people who are licensed and skilled and etc. to install stuff is because when a layperson that isn't licensed does it, there is an increased risk that they burn their house down or destroy something. When someone does that, it doesn't just risk them and their family, it potentially risks their neighborhood or causing a larger public safety threat. So for that reason, many countries have decided to make the speed at which they can install things essentially less efficient by saying the regular lay people can't do it because they want to lessen the risks of these other hazards. And that's sort of the reason behind why the way these building codes work. Now, you can have debates on that on either end, but that's the reason that's basically given. Why don't Europeans have air conditioners? The basic answer is the rich people do have air conditioners. Energy prices are too high for everyone to have them, so they can't afford them. When energy prices are really, really high, think about the perspective of an air conditioning company. If I go into a market and most people can't afford to run my unit, I'm not going to sell many units, so I'm not going to enter that market. This means that air conditioners, there isn't that huge of a supply of them there in the first place. So with the few ones that do exist, the price gets really, really high. When there's one of these large rushes of people all wanting air conditioners, the market hasn't supplied them for a while and they just don't exist. It's complicated, but you don't have as, like, if your market has one air conditioning company in it, they can pretty much set the price they want. If it has 30 that are all competing with each other, then the price is going to go down and down and down and down. In Canada, in the United States, and other countries where we have a lot of air conditioning, there's a lot of competition, the price decreases. You don't have that over there because they don't have as many companies that do it, or the companies that do sell them over here because we have the market. Why don't people have enough power for these air conditioners? So why people don't have power? Main reason, Europe isn't producing power at the same rate as the rest of the world is. They're not keeping up with the demand. The power that is being produced is being sent to hospitals, it's being sent to government, it's being sent to rich people that can afford it, it's being sent to critical infrastructure in general, and they've put a cap on supply. So because you can't afford it and the government has decided so. Why did the government decide so? Because priorities on climate change. That's pretty much the issue. And you'll see a lot of the politics unfold because of that. There's also the issue of, even if you had the ability to produce the power, you need to be able to distribute it. So let's say that, overnight, Europe and certain countries, France, like snapped their fingers and doubled the amount of power that's produced in the country. They don't have the lines, they don't have the power transformers, they don't have the distribution network to move the power. So even if you can produce it, you still have to move it. This is a total sector infrastructure upgrade that needs to happen to realistically meet this need. In fact, you'd probably want to upgrade distribution first, just so that you can handle the power that you're going to bring online. That's another thing. Third thing, reason why that they don't have enough power for these air conditioners, the building infrastructure itself can't support it. So a lot of their buildings are really, really old and they haven't upgraded them. It's one thing to install an air conditioner, but you have to plug it into something. And some of these buildings don't have power ran to them. There's sometimes some pretty significant infrastructure challenges here. Canada runs into these too, because we have a very, very large country, but we spend a lot of money on infrastructure because of these sorts of challenges. Follow-up question that usually comes from that one: why haven't they updated their old buildings? There's two main factors. Factor one is the thing I was talking about before around requiring regulated, licensed professionals to install this. You're talking about electricians by and large, but they don't have enough electricians. They could decide to let their public just do their own wiring, but houses would burn down, people would die, and you'd have problems. In that country, just like in Canada, we require electricians to do it. They don't have enough. So that's one thing. You need enough electricians. The second is the sheer size of the problem. So they have so many old buildings. You'd think since 2003, that's over 20 years, they could figure this out. No, there's a lot of old buildings. There actually is so many old buildings, they can't do it in 20 years given their number of electricians. So even if they just threw money at this thing, the reality is they just don't have enough people. Now, there is an argument that they could, heavily invest into colleges and training people in the trades and overhauling a huge part of their population to fix this issue. But right now, they just don't have that. They don't have the ability to upgrade their infrastructure. They just don't have the people for it. That's the one main flaw in that strategy they have right now, but we can talk about addressing that later. Why not produce more power and upgrade the grid? So why not actually just do this and just get through the problem, and then you'd have the air conditioning companies want to come in? The reality is that they have adopted the strategy of trying to reduce power consumption to attack their emissions for climate change and global warming. A cynic that is ignoring other factors would basically make this argument, and this is the sort of argument that is made depending on the person you're talking to in the risk industry, but basically it goes like this. You have two choices. Choice number one, you can go full on power now and make people more comfortable, but you will hasten the destruction of the human species. Choice two, a bunch of people can die now and humanity can maybe survive at all or for longer. Pick one. That's basically the framework they're thinking in. And when that's your framework, the framework of people need to die now so the human race can survive later, if that's your framework, then this decision makes sense. Now, you may disagree with that framework, you may agree with that framework. I'm not making a comment on either one of those, but it is fairly clear when you talk to some people in this industry around this issue that that is essentially the framework they're working with. And under that, you basically conclude, if you agree with that, the deaths that are occurring to this heat wave are acceptable losses for the survival of the species. So have fun with that. Okay, what do I think they should do? So at some point people go, okay, Alex, but what do you think they should do? What is your thoughts? You know all this stuff. What should they do? Okay, when looking at what they would do, I would consider a few more things, because, and these are not normally the things that you hear talked about, but these are the sorts of things that I would consider. In addition to all the other stuff that was talked about, one, the largest emitters for greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, etc. in the world are the United States and China, especially China, who's way up there. These are military superpowers. You are not going to tell them what to do. They're also economic superpowers. You are not going to tell them what to do. They're going to tell you what to do. When the United States and China are basically in an energy race with each other, trying to technologically advance faster than the other, and you're over there, what you do basically doesn't matter. Now, if the United States and China were saying, we're the only ones that are allowed to emit, and you're not, then you would kind of have a position where, well, like we're being forced. But in this instance, they don't care. The United States and China do not care if Europe emits. They've backed out of a whole bunch of these climate accords. They don't care. So the reality is that you're not really even the problem, and no one's stopping you from emitting. So that's one thing. Two, and I know people are going to say, but everyone can contribute, but just because they're being bad doesn't mean that we should. I get that, but if you look at most of the climate data on the risk side of this that says that we need to reduce emissions by over 80% or we're basically all dead, and 50+% of emissions are China alone, and they're not going to stop, then you just kind of conclude we're all dead. Please see one of our global warming videos. So, and number two, getting further behind the superpowers weakens your negotiating position, and you eventually get forced into a place where you just have to do what they say anyways. So there's a few different ways this can happen. Your economy can get weakened to the point that you basically are forced to isolate and you can't interface with the global economy. Your economy can get weakened to the point where they force a bad deal on you because energy prices go up and up and up and you're just not willing to produce, whatever. But basically going into a worse negotiating position has the downstream effect of forcing you to do what they tell you to do anyways, from either them forcing you through economic pressure or military pressure or whatever, or through your own public. So with the existence of the internet, social media, and information being everywhere, when European citizens eventually have a huge difference in standard of living between themselves and North America, when North America appears to be living in, opulence and Europe is living in squalor, and that is noticeable, the Europeans will just revolt, either through defeating governments and forcing people into power that will change policy and just turn on coal plants, or frankly, as has historically happened in Europe and most of their countries, they just violently revolt and remove the government forcefully. Yeah, if you look at the way protests happen in Canada, the United States, you compare it to the way that they happen in Europe pretty regularly. In Europe, 100,000 people will just show up at the government building and demand a change happen, and then it happens. So if they're living in a very bad situation for long enough, they'll just force the issue. So that's kind of a reality that I would think about from this, because this is governments making decision. And if I were sort of the government here, I would have to consider the fact that at some point my hand will just be forced anyways. Three, technological advancements in power production are rapidly evolving. So when you attack the challenge of climate change, global warming, etc., there's the reduce the amount of power that's being used. There's that angle. There's increase the efficiencies, but really it's the design technology that helps you get more power out while creating less emissions or being more efficient in some way. Efficiency improvements are the end game here. Everybody who is serious in this knows that that's the end game here. It's not feasible to return to caves and fire. It's just kind of not going to happen. So the technological advancement piece of this is kind of the most important thing. And I would put a huge focus on whatever you need to do to improve your technological advancement. Those are kind of the three additional things I would look at with this. Now with that, I would then come to basically these recommendations. By and large, based on all the information I've said before, would be stuff that I would do if I were these countries. One, I would massively increase investment into the trades and training professionals that exist to build up this infrastructure faster. When you don't have the people, you need the people. A lot of these countries have issues right now politically with immigration, with their population getting divided, and a lot of this is based on economy, cost of living, lack of jobs, etc. If you just did huge investment and focus on infrastructure and trade jobs, if you basically made it economically moronic to not go into the trades, your public would go into the trades and you would have the people to improve this infrastructure. You need to build it anyways. That would sort of be the first focus that I would look at, going into the trades very heavily. This involves significant put pressure in schooling. There's multiple ways to do this, but look, the reality is that your social sciences are not building your bridges. Your social sciences are not making it so your power goes on, and you have a problem where your infrastructure is shutting down. You need to fund your infrastructure. STEM is required. And even within STEM specifically, you don't need medical, you need power. You need to focus on getting the stuff built, and you need the people to do that. The second would be, I would build power. So assuming that you have those people, frankly, you could even build coal right now. I know, I get it, from climate, you shouldn't, but the reality is that your people are going to force it pretty soon, and it being done forcibly by people who are desperate is going to be done a lot more inefficiently or aggressively than it will likely be done in a controlled environment. So if you're going to build it, you might as well build it, and you might as well do it right rather than doing it by force quickly. You need to build power. Look, if you want it to be nuclear, make it nuclear. If it needs to be wind, solar, whatever, you can. You're going to have to build carbon power as a backup for the wind solar, because the wind solar isn't effective for meeting grid demand. But whatever, like, you need to build power. It's clear that you have to do that. In addition to building power, and this is 3, you need to build energy distribution and transportation infrastructure. This is pipelines, this is power lines, this is power transformers. You need to be able to move the power around. It's got to get done. You basically don't have a choice. So this is, once again, going back to getting the people trained in it, spending the money, putting the infrastructure in. The infrastructure's got to get built. It's not a matter of if this is going to happen. It's a matter of when this is going to happen. There's no stopping this. People are not going to accept living in squalor compared to stuff they see on the internet. It's just not going to happen. Well, okay. Having said that, you could get really draconian, shut off your internet, take everyone's cell phones away, and force them to live in squalor, and then use the military to crack down on them and, basically remove their freedom because it's required to save the human species. You could go that route, but I don't think that's going to work very well. So you could, but Also, the amount of emissions you have from trying to undo that and cracking down the population might actually be more than if you just gave them power. So good luck with that one. The last thing, and this is huge, I would take a serious look at technology that is at low TR levels, so technological readiness levels. Technological readiness is how ready a technology is to go into the public. So you've got like level 1, which is like an idea on a napkin, and then you've got level 9, which is for full commercial. It's out in the public. You can buy it at your local store. So where the technology is, I would start looking at like your 3 to 5 range. Usually the 3 to 5 range stuff, the stuff that's largely done by postdoc students or by postdocs, not people who are like the supervising professors, but the young people with ideas. That sort of work doesn't get funded a lot, especially in Canada. We kind of just tend to ignore it. We tend to wait until stuff is tier level like 7, 8, and then, or for those of you who like 6, 7, there you go, I'll put that in for you, have fun with that. So we tend to put stuff that's higher because it's a greater chance that it's going to be commercialized, and you have less risk of sort of just like throwing money in the blast furnace. The problem is that a lot of these ideas, the idea in general that is going to save us all from this apocalypse plus giving people the energy they want, is going to be one of these science projects. And the only way that a science project makes it to being able to solve these problems is if you fund the science project. So you need to fund the science project. We are not doing that right now. I think that serious power investment should be looked at, monetary investment, et cetera, should be looked at, looking at what we need to do to fix these problems and looking at the technology that needs to get developed to fix these problems. Many people might not remember, but throughout history, we have had many technologies where before and after that technology came out, in a very short amount of time, huge changes have been made. Look at before and after electricity, look at before and after, the discovery of the telephone, before and after penicillin. There are small things that have huge impacts because small technologies or like these ideas are allowed to bore fruit. We need that. And if you're not going towards that, you're not really trying to fix the problem. You're just kind of delaying the inevitable. Now, this might require investing in some dirty stuff. Like, look, if you want to make clean coal, you got to research into coal. So you need people working on coal. If you want to make nuclear power safer so that you have less Chernobyl incidents, you need to do research into nuclear power. If you want wind, solar to be more effective and actually viable, because right now they're basically not without power storage, which we haven't solved yet, then you need to do research into them, right? All of these things, if you have a bunch of a certain resource, you should look into it. What does your country have a lot of? Does it have a lot of potential for wind power? Probably there should be research. Does it have a lot of coal? You should probably be researching coal. Whatever way you have to make energy, because you're going to use it, find a way to use it that's more effective, that's more efficient. Because at the end of the day, someone's going to buy it and it's going to get used. And even if you don't burn the coal, China will buy it and China will. So the coal's getting burned anyways. So you might as well find a way to do it more efficiently. Anyways, that's the heat wave and a bit on energy because they're directly related. We'll see the death toll rise. If this gets any hotter, if this goes into the territory of the heat wave that we saw in 2003, this is going to get not really funny, really fast. And we'll probably see people making memes about it though, so what the hey. Anyways, love heat waves. It's actually very hot today. I put on a long shirt for you guys in solidarity, but in Canada, I have air conditioning, so I'm going to go enjoy that. You guys have a great day, and I'm going to enjoy my air conditioning. Yeah, see ya.